Yeah, thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Carmen Puccio. I'm an AWS Partner Solutions Architect, and I focus on our migration competency, helping our consulting partners and our technology partners move customer workloads over to AWS. Today I'm joined with Michael Scicenti, and he's a Senior Product Manager for the AWS Migration Hub. So what to expect from today's webinar? We're going to briefly talk about some of the challenges around migrating your portfolio and discovering your workloads. And then Michael's going to give you a deep dive into the Migration Hub. And at the same time, he's going to give you a demo of the Migration Hub as well. So in almost all cases, the migration process to the cloud looks like this, but as most folks know, each migration really has its own set of requirements and challenges because, to be honest with you, they're all unique. And what we call this migration process here at AWS is our mental model, and it's built from the AWS CAF, or the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework, which is a simple and agile process for achieving sustainable business value with AWS cloud services. So I could really spend an entire session on the migration process and methodology, but I wanted to give you a visual representation on the migration process so you can see how it's broken up into multiple phases and how you can really understand how tools in the Migration Hub can help you through your journey. So I'm going to briefly touch on the various different phases, and then we'll move forward with the demo. First off, a discovery or an all-in scope of your IT assets should be really performed, basically trying to figure out the network connectivity and dependencies. Before you even start your application migration, you really want to understand what applications are talking to what, because it really helps you get into that planning phase when it comes to your migration. And this is really where your project team is going to do a deep assessment of the data that's found and use that to drive the actual migration itself. When we get into that design and migrate phase, I actually like to call it our migration factory, and I like to lump the two of them together. And this is really where you want to start to figure out what tools you're going to use and start to look at building automation into your migration, because as you migrate more and more applications, you really start to see patterns emerge, which are technically going to allow you to migrate with velocity. And finally, the last step, which I consider the most fun step, it's the optimize phase, right? And so the optimize phase is where you're really going to maximize the benefits for hosting those applications in AWS. But the thing that I always tell our customers is just because you've migrated your application does not mean that you're done. And this is really where you need to fine tune the application and constantly evolve it so you can really realize the true benefits of the cloud. So the key theme for this slide right here, it's basically calling out that there's multiple different types of workloads for migration. So whether it's a server migration or a virtual machine migration, or perhaps it's containers or database or data, or maybe even it's infrastructure services. When you're moving each one of these workloads, you really need to track the migration and each of the resources as an application and not an individual server per se. And an application really represents the overall arching software application or a business process or the overall value stream. And there's various different ways that you can move an application, whether it's a rehost or a replatform. Or maybe it's potentially you're going to do a complete rewrite of the application, also known as a re-architecture. The first two that I mentioned, the rehost and the replatform, are the two most common, and they're the migration types that are supported by the Migration Hub today. Rehosts are also known as lift and shift, for example. They're basically doing that pick up and move as is of an existing data center asset into AWS. And perhaps they're using one of our partner tools that are integrated with the Migration Hub, like Cloud Endure or Adidata, or perhaps they're using the AWS Server Migration Service. Replatform migrations typically involve changing the underlying platform the application depends on. The AWS Database Migration Service is often used for replatforming database servers. So for example, perhaps you're going from an old version of MySQL to a new version of MySQL, or perhaps you're going from MySQL to AWS Aurora. The other migration types really, when it comes down to that refactor, re-architect, retain, repurchase, retire, the AWS Migration Hub would like to help with those migration approaches, but again, today it only focuses on rehost and replatform migrations. So when it comes to migration execution challenges, we like to break it down again along with that mental model. So when you're looking at it from the discovery or the planning or the migrate phase, each one has its own execution challenges. So from the discovery side, most folks typically rely on CMDBs, and to be honest with you, when it comes to the CMDB model, It's a great way to keep track of your IT real estate, but a lot of times they're decentralized and they're not necessarily up to date. But again, at the same time, when you talk about the visualization of dependencies and trying to understand what applications are talking to what, you're not necessarily going to pull that type of information from a CMDB. And when it comes to planning, performing an analysis on discovered data is very time consuming. So determining on how and when to migrate an application is typically, it's very time consuming. And if not done correctly, it can bring some risk to your application. And when it comes to migrating your application, again, it really gets into that lack of visibility into migrations. So you want to be able to actually visualize what's happening, and as your various different pieces of your application are moving from your on-premises environment into AWS. And tracking across multiple tools is typically, it's very complex. So you want to actually have a centralized view into what's going on with your migration. So when it comes to tracking challenges, again, we talk about multiple tools being in place, whether it's a lift and shift or perhaps it's a rehost. And today, the AWS Migration Hub, we offer multiple solutions that are integrated with the hub. So whether it's the database migration service, the server migration service, or perhaps it's one of our tools like Cloud Endor or Adadata, you have a centralized place to actually visualize your application migrations. So regardless, when you're thinking about your challenges for migration, if you really think about the previous slide that I had up before, it really boils down to people using multiple tools and the ability to track those workloads as they're migrated to AWS. You want to be able to visualize it into a central place. And so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, and he's going to give you a deep dive into the hub.
Thank you, Carmen. Those challenges is why we introduced the AWS Migration Hub last summer. We want to help you simplify and accelerate your migration execution. And the hub gives you a single location to track the progress of your application migrations across AWS and partner solutions. So you can use the migration tools that best fit your needs and track the migration of your status across all those tools in a single place. We also are excited that the hub lets you track your migrations into any AWS region that your migration tool supports. The hub itself is in US West 2, and you'll go to its console in US West 2, but you can move into any AWS region as long as your migration tool supports it. And the hub is available today at no additional charge. You only pay for the cost of the migration tools you use and any resources being consumed in AWS. We mentioned that there are partner tools and AWS tools integrated. These are the 5 tools that are integrated with the Migration Hub today that can be used for migration tracking. From AWS, we have the Application Discovery Service. The hub is built on top of the Application Discovery Service, and it uses it for your servers and your applications. And so that's where you'll group your servers into applications, and then you'll track those applications inside the Migration Hub as you migrate the servers and databases within them. The AWS Server Migration Service helps you move VMs into AWS, and it is integrated with the Migration Hub. Once you connect it to the Migration Hub, which we'll show in the demo, you can then track the status of all your migration tasks in the Server Migration Service inside the hub, and you can group them into applications and track them as a unit throughout your migration. Finally, the Database Migration Service from AWS helps you both rehost and replatform databases into AWS. So you can, for rehost, you can move from MySQL on-premise to MySQL in AWS. But you can also replatform. You could upgrade the version of MySQL from an older one to a newer one, or you could go from MySQL to AWS Aurora. And it will send status into the Migration Hub, and then you can view it alongside the status from Server Migration Service or any of our partner tools inside of an application grouping. We also have 2 partner tools that are integrated, Adadata and Cloud Endor. Adadata AdaMotion helps you move servers and VMs into AWS, and Cloud Endor does this, live migration does the same. Each tool has different benefits, and sometimes customers use a combination of all of these tools, and so we want to make it as easy as possible to track across all these tools in one place inside the Migration Hub. Wanted to provide some extra information about the Application Discovery Service because the hub uses it. You don't have to use the Application Discovery Service for discovery, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the hub will store application grouping information in ADS. If you do need to perform discovery with ADS, it offers two ways to do discovery. You can deploy agents on physical servers or VMs, and that's able to collect technical specifications, performance information, and network dependencies, and finally process information. You can also alternatively deploy one VMware appliance, what we call a connector, to your vCenter, and it will talk to the vSphere APIs and collect information about all the VMs running on your vCenter instance. The connector can collect similar information to the agent, but it does not collect network dependencies or process information. And so once you've captured all this information and it's stored in the application discovery service, you can then export and analyze it, and then group your servers and databases applications inside of the application discovery service. Oftentimes this is done before migrating and for whichever applications you're going to move first. And of course, you can access the application discovery service data via its APIs if you wanted to do something else with that data aside from export. So because you can start using the Migration Hub by using the application discovery service to perform discovery, there's two ways to use the Migration Hub. I'm going to go over here how you use the Migration Hub when you start with discovery and then use it for migration tracking. And then on the next slide, I'll talk about how if you only want to use it for migration tracking, you can use the hub. And it's a similar workflow, but slightly different. So if you're going to use the application discovery service, the first thing you do is you deploy an ADS connector or agents into your data center, depending on what information you need and what level of detail. And so once you deploy those and you tell them to start collecting, you view your servers and you start grouping them into applications. You can do this from the console, or you can export the data, analyze it outside of the Migration Hub, and then bring in your app groupings via the CLI or console. Once you're ready to move your first applications, you'll start selecting and connecting your migration tools that you're going to use. So those ones I showed you previously that are integrated with the hub. So you might pick Server Migration Service and Database Migration Service, and you would authorize them to send status to the hub. Once you've authorized those tools, you have your application groupings, you can start migrating the application in the tool itself. The Migration Hub does not automate migrations today. However, it does bring all those statuses in one place and show you the status inside that application automatically. And so as you migrate the application, you can track the status of that grouping without having to manually gather the status from each of those tools. Finally, as you repeat this process for each application in your portfolio, you'll start having app servers that you can decommission, which is the ultimate goal. And so once you've moved all the apps off that particular that server, you can decommission it. The alternative workflow, which I'll also show when we walk through the Migration Hub user experience in the console, is if you've already performed discovery with another discovery tool, or you do not want to perform discovery or don't need to, you can simply start by migrating and using the Migration Hub. And so this workflow is similar, but it's slightly different than the previous one. The first thing you do here is you're going to select and connect your migration tools. So you're going to authorize them to send status to the Migration Hub. And then you're going to go to the tool itself and set up your migration tasks. So you're going to go into SMS, DMS, Cloud Endure, or Adadata, and you're going to create the task or set of tasks that you want to, for the servers or databases you want to move first. Because you didn't perform discovery with the application discovery service, creating this task tells the Migration Hub that that server exists or that database exists. And so it's kind of like a just-in-time workflow. So once you've created the task, the hub knows the server database exists, and you can now group it as an application, either from the console or the CLI. And then you proceed to migrate the application, and you track the status as you migrate it, in the same way that you did in the previous workflow. And then, of course, the ultimate goal, as the app server has no more applications running on it, you can decommission it. I'm now going to walk through that last workflow, migrate using the Migration Hub, that I just stepped through. I'll also throughout explain where the workflow is slightly different when using the discover and migrate workflow. For those of you who would like to discover first using the application discovery service. We're now going to walk through an actual migration scenario using the Migration Hub to track application migrations. When you're a new user and you come to the Migration Hub, you'll see this screen on our main dashboard. You'll also be prompted to get started with discovery or get started with migrating, the two workflows we just went through. And if you click each of these buttons, you'll also see those steps summarized here again and a prompt for the first step in each of the processes. I'm going to walk through getting started migrating, but I'm going to be using an account that already has some data. So as I walk through it, I'll also show you the getting started with discovery workflow and the slight differences between the two. I'm now in the account where I've already performed some discovery and some migrations. I'm on the help and support page. Here's a quick overview of this left nav. The top level dashboard is going to give you key migration metrics about moving your applications into AWS. The Discover section is discovery information about your servers that have either come from the AWS discovery tools like the agent or connector, or from migration tools you've used in the Start with Migration workflow. The Migrate section provides you key migration status information about your application migrations. Here in Help and Support, you can come back here for links to the user guides and other important migration resources, and an overview of those two workflows that we went over. I'm going to show the migrate without performing discovery workflow, and then mention some of the parts of my data in my account that have come from performing discovery so that you can see how the two workflows differ. So the first thing we need to do is connect migration tools to the Migration Hub. So when you go to the Migrate Tools section, you'll see information about the various tools you can connect to the hub. I've already connected the server migration service to this account. When it's not connected, you can click Connect here, and if you have IAM admin rights, it will add the IAM role to the account. If you manage your IAM roles in another way, you can click Documentation to learn more how to manually add the role. Our partner tools, we cannot add the role directly, but we do link to the documentation for the steps for each tool and how to connect them to the Migration Hub. Once a tool is connected, they will then send status to the Migration Hub, no matter which region you're migrating into. The hub is always in US West 2, and you go to the console in US West 2, but even if you're moving into other regions, the tool, once authorized, will send status to the Migration Hub in US West 2. Since I have Server Migration Service and Database Migration Service connected, I'm now ready to start creating tasks in each of those tools. By creating a migration task in Server Migration Service, and I haven't performed discovery, it's going to tell the Migration Hub that that server exists. So we're discovering that server by creating a migration task. So I'm now in the Server Migration Service console. And as you can see, I already have one connector running. I'm not going to step through setting up SMS, but the main thing that you need to do is set up a connector for SMS and authorize it to discover your servers in VMware, in vCenter. And so as you can see, I've already imported my catalog into the Server Migration Service, and I can migrate any of these servers. So the first thing I'm going to do is find a VM to migrate. There's a storage gateway here that will work. And I say create replication job. So I'm still managing this task, this migration, in SMS itself. The migration was not automating it for me, but once I create this migration task, and I want it to replicate every 12 hours, I'll have it start immediately. It requires a role that I've already created. I'll keep 2 AMIs. So as I can see, that it gives me the basic VM information about this VM, and it's asking me to confirm the job details. And so I create this task. Now, in my account, I've installed the AWS Application Discovery Service Connector. If this server exists, the Migration Hub is going to match this replication job server to the discovered connector server. If it does not exist, then it will create a server with the information sent from the server migration service. So back on the Migration Hub, I can go to Updates under Migrate, and I see that a few seconds ago, I got information about VM 218. Its next replication run has been scheduled. And I see the tool being used is SMS. Now I also see that it's automatically been mapped to a server. This will always happen. It'll either create a server for SMS, for the data SMS gave in the migrate first workflow, or it'll match it to an application discovery service discovered server. I can click the server name and see more information. This particular migration task from SMS was matched to the server I discovered using the application discovery service connector. If I had not performed discovery with the connector, then it would have created a server and the source would have been listed as SMS. And so if I go to discover servers, I can see that I have quite a few connector discovered servers, but here's one from DMS. This database migration service task sent us information about a server with this particular host name, and it wasn't in our application discovery service repository. I had not performed discovery with it. I hadn't found it via connector or an agent. And so the Migration Hub created a server in ADS with this host name. And the source is marked as the database migration service. So now I'll find that server that I created in SMS and I'll group it to an application so that I can track it with the database that I'll also be migrating using the database migration service. So I go to Updates, and I will click on the server migration server that is matched to that task, and I can see that it's not in any applications. So under Actions, I group as an application. I'm going to group this to a new application that we'll call the CRM app. And it's now in that application. Now, if you perform discovery with the application discovery service connector agent, you can group all these servers and databases as applications prior to starting the migration task. So as I said, this is a just-in-time workflow. So now that server is in an application, can go to Migrate Applications, and I see the CRM app here, the one I just created. I see that one server is in it, and its migration status is not started. Now, once in this application, I see that status again here. This is one of two migration status types that we track in the Migration Hub. Not started is the application migration status. It's the status for the overall grouping of servers and databases in the application. I change the status manually. This is also available via the API and CLI if you wanted to automate it. And so I'm going to set it to in progress, and I've now updated the application grouping status. Everything below in the application, however, is an automated status being reported by the migration tool. So as I can see here, this SMS task is currently uploading and is in progress. As it completes, I will see different statuses here. It'll move to completed. If it runs into an error, it will automatically move to the error column and give me details about the error. And then I go to SMS to troubleshoot the issue. In the table below, the table will update with the current status. And once SMS has created an AMI, which it'll do each replication run, the result will be linked here. And so that I can go see that AMI in EC2 and launch an instance if I'd like. Other migration tools do different things. The database migration service links to the endpoint, which I'll show in a second. Cloud Endor and Addadata, our partner tools, will link to an EC2 instance because they launch one once they've migrated. So as you can see, it just updated to converting. And so now I'm ready to start moving database. Prior to this, I had already set up my database endpoints in the database migration service, which is a necessary step. I'll now go to the database migration service, and I'm on its dashboard. I've created endpoints for many of the servers that I'm going to move. I have quite a few sources here and some targets. So with the database migration service, you have to tell it about the server, the database you're going to move. And so just to show you, when you create an endpoint, you tell it whether it's a source or target, you give it a name, and you pick what type of database the engine is, and then information about how to connect to that server, that database server. Now I've already done all that. So I have a source and I have a target that are ready to be moved. And so now I need to create a task that will move it. Now it's telling me that if I'm migrating an application, so a grouping of servers and databases, or just a grouping of databases, I can go group them and track progress as an application grouping in the hub. And it's telling me this because I've authorized DMS to send status to the hub. I've connected it. And so I click Create Task, give it a name. So we'll call this the webinar. Actually, this is a CRM app, so we'll say CRM DB. I already created a replication instance. This is part of setting up the database migration service. And I'll pick a source endpoint. I have a webinar endpoint here. So this is my source database that I previously set up. And I have one target database it's being moved to. I want to migrate the existing data. And I don't want to start the task on create. These are various settings that I'll leave at the default when using DMS for how it runs the migration job. And I have a schema called migrate me. So I tell it to move the migrate me schema. And finally I tell it to create the task. Now, it's now created this task and it's in the state creating. So I'll go back to the Migration Hub and I'll go to updates. And what will happen is that once the database migration service tells the Migration Hub that this task exists, which could take a minute or two, the hub's going to check to see if that database server exists in the Discover Server section. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create a DMS, a source server with the source of DMS and the host name of this database server being moved. There is a slight delay here, and so we'll wait for it to appear. The easiest way right now for me to check that is under Updates. And as I can see, it's now there. It has a mapped server. The tool being used is DMS, and the task is not started. And we got this a few seconds ago. So if I click that mapped server, I see that the source is the database migration service. And as you can see, I don't have a lot of information about this server. This server was discovered because the migration tool told the Migration Hub about it. And so it can only provide the information that the migration tool knows. And so in the case of the database migration service, that's the host name. But we now have this server and we can group it into an application. So if I group it from here, could also do this from the CLI. I'll add it to the CRM app. And now under Migrate Applications, I see there are two servers. And I can go in and I can watch the progress of both the SMS task and the DMS task as they progress. And so the app's in progress and the DMS task is still not started. But I can already go to DMS and look at what endpoint it's being migrated to. The database migration service does not know if it's moving the database into a specific RDS instance. So all we do today is link you to the target endpoint information so that you can view which instance it is and then go find it in RDS. And so once the database migration service is migrating this database and that replication job is running, it's going to send the status to the Migration Hub and we'll see it here in this app grouping. And so if you're the migration lead, you could leave this page up throughout the day as the migration tasks were progressing and automatically see the latest status from each of the tools. So as they complete, you could then take care of any post replication configuration you need to do or testing. Or if you run into an error, you can very quickly just learn about that error from any of the tools and then go troubleshoot the issue in the tool itself. You can see the order just switched because SMS sent another update that it's converting. Now, if you wanted to move just a bunch of SMS servers and track them as a move group or a workload, you could also use the app grouping for that. And the same applies for database migration service. You don't have to mix the tools if you're not going to be moving with multiple tools, but you can still group your servers or databases together and track them as a group inside the Migration Hub. The app grouping itself is very flexible. We can check back in the database migration service to see that the task is ready. We did not start this task. So now we click Start, and now it is starting. So we can go back to the Migration Hub. After the task starts, it's going to start updating the hub with the latest information about that task, including the percentages of how much of the database has been replicated. So as the database migration service starts replicating the database, we'll see that detailed information being updated here live as it happens. Without needing to hit refresh, you just leave the page open, and as soon as an update comes in, it shows it here, including any errors. Now, while that task is getting started, I'll also mention some things about grouping applications, since that's an important part of this workflow. As you can see here, the DMS server is the most recently discovered one. It's now listed here as in the application CRM. If you perform discovery using the application discovery service connector or agents, you can group your servers and databases ahead of time here in the console simply by clicking the ones you like or applying a filter and selecting them. And you can add them to an existing application or create a new one. Today we support name and description for the application. You can also perform the app grouping via the CLI. So a common workflow is you export the data from the application discovery service, you analyze it outside the application discovery service and come up with your app groupings, and then you use the CLI to bulk import your application groupings for the servers discovered. You could also bring in app groupings from another source. You cannot import into the application discovery service today, but you can use the CLI to bring in application groupings from other sources in bulk without having to create each application here in the user experience in the console. So that was a very small database. So as we can see, the database migration service has already completed migrating it and replicating it. And so now that it's completed, you could perform any other post-replication tasks you need to do to test and verify that the database has been migrated properly. Once the server migration service task completes, you'll want to set, after you've fully cut over and tested the application, tested and cut over, you'll want to mark the application as completed. And once it's marked as completed, this is signaling that the app is fully cut over and the migration is done. You don't have to change the status very often. All that information, though, flows up into the top-level dashboard. And this is for you, the migration lead, and your key stakeholders in your organization. The dashboard will show you the most recently updated applications. So you can see the CRM app has 2 servers and was marked completed, and it was last updated a few seconds ago. I very easily see that the reInvent Speaker Manager, that has a red task or one or more. And so there's an error. And so I could click through and go troubleshoot that issue. And then I see on the reInvent Registration app, that one was also completed and was updated about 3 hours ago. I can see the applications by migration status. So I don't have any apps that are not started. I have 2 apps that are in progress, and I've completed 6 application migrations. So this gives me a view into my entire portfolio for everything that I'm migrating, I've grouped as an application. What's the current migration status? Finally, at the bottom here, I see migrated applications over time. I get 2 metrics here. I get the total number of applications completed in the time window, which is 6, and that gives me a feel for my migration velocity over time. So the steeper this line gets, the more applications I'm completing in a particular month. And then the green bar chart gives me the total completed in a particular month. So see that in January I completed 3, and in February I've already completed 2. I can also adjust the time window to 3 months and 6 months, and as there's more migration migrations that have been completed over time, I'll see a 12-month and an all-time time window. As your migrations progress and you continue to track in the Migration Hub at the application level and the dashboard, you'll be marking applications migrations as complete as you cut them over. And so if you were to come back to the Migration Hub many months later, your migration dashboard would look something like this. Now in a different account, but this one is showing data for many more months than the account I was just on. And so this is months later. You can see I still have something being migrated. Luckily there's no errors there. And I've got several that were recently completed. In this particular account, 5 applications are still not started. 4 are in progress, but I've completed 10 application migrations. And I've been working on this migration project, it looks like, since July. So I started off a little slow with 1 app in July, 1 in August. I got 2 done in October, 3 in November, and then things are picking back up now in February with 3. And I can see the total up here also, that I've got 10 application migrations completed. Now I've got a 12-month time window. I can also zoom in and see the last 6 months or the last 3 and see that nothing was migrated in December and January. And so using the Migration Hub, your migration leads can get key information about whatever application migrations they're performing across migration tools, and they can group them into applications or workloads that correspond to how you're probably already tracking your migrations. Additionally, your key stakeholders can come to the dashboard and very quickly at a glance see key information about your migrations and the progress of them. And then if any errors are occurring, your migration leads can use the most recently updated applications to very quickly go into that application and start troubleshooting much more quickly than they might have in the past.